Thank you. I would like to call the Town of Rocky Hill Planning and Zoning Commission a special meeting to order. It's a Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. Agenda item 2A.
Agenda item 2A, review and report to Town Council on the Connecticut General Statute 8-24, referral for an access easement and driveway for the MDC pump station for property located at 63 Pratt Street in an R20 residential zoning district ID 10.149.
Kim?
Okay. This is from, actually, our engineering department received this, and based upon what they're proposing, the Metropolitan District has a pump station on Pratt Street, currently on property owned by the town of Rocky Hill. Ages ago, they did receive an 824 referral and moved on to the town council for permission to locate there. What they'd like to do is actually create a driveway, and our town council has asked that we have a referral from the Planning and Zoning Commission back to them about the driveway access. There's a plan in your packet showing the easement for driveway location on the curve on Pratt Street down by the railroad tracks. What they're looking to do is create the easement in the area shaded in pink on the map. And it's not something for this commission to act on, basically just to send it on,
Refer.
refer it back to the town council.
Any questions? Commissioner Glico, any questions on
Good.
Mr. Robbins?
Oh, it seems to be located down at the bottom of the hill, over near the
Yeah.
train tracks, so it's not that big a deal.
Can I have a motion for referral?
Make a motion to refer this?
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So all the three sitting commissioners are regular members today?
Thank you.
Going to item 2B, agenda item 2B.
Agenda item 2B, review draft Rocky Hill Affordable Plan with Glenn Chalder. I apologize.
No worries.
Planometric Inc., and a set public hearing.
Yep.
Good evening, Commissioners. As you know, since the spring of 2022, we've been working on the preparation of Affordable Housing Plan. Affordable Housing Plan is a document that was required in legislation passed in 2017, required that each municipality in Connecticut prepare an Affordable Housing Plan and adopt it in 2022. So that's the direction that we've been moving in. You may recall back in the spring, we did a online survey of residents to get their input on the plan. And then based on guidance and feedback from the commission, I've prepared this draft affordable housing plan for review and comment, and if the commission is comfortable in terms of moving forward. The plan is broken down into four main parts. The first section overall is a plan for housing choices and providing some background on why this focus on housing is occurring at the present time. The second major section is background data in terms of some of the statistical and other data relevant to this project. The third section, called benchmarks, is a summary of what our plan of conservation and development says about housing and affordable housing, and also then the survey results summarized here. And then the fourth major section of the plan are actual strategies, and I think this is, of course, the main element of any type of planning document. And then there's appendices at the end, which is meant to provide, again, additional information that people may find useful or helpful. I think we'll modify the cover letter as we move through this process and eventually through to adoption, et cetera. The first major section of the plan, I believe we've talked about before. It's about planning for housing choices for Rocky Hill. So while the state requires that the municipality prepare a document called an affordable housing plan, this is really a more evolved and developed housing plan for Rocky Hill. And I think realistically, this is about providing for choices. Now, Rocky Hill already has a fairly diverse housing stock in terms of different types of housing and different configurations in different parts of the community. So we're benefiting from that situation. The challenge is that with what's happened in recent years, affordability has become an even bigger challenge. The developers tend to build at the upper end of the market, and in fact, many people need housing in other parts of the market as well. Proposed an overall goal here on page 4, continue to provide for a variety of housing options throughout Rocky Hill to expand housing options and choices and help meet the housing needs of households of all ages, sizes, incomes, and characteristics. So I hope that's a goal statement that the Commission feels comfortable with, and I think the plan is configured in that direction. On page 5, we've provided some information here, I think, to help people understand why housing has suddenly become an issue of public policy concern nationally in Connecticut and also here in Rocky Hill. So the top chart on this page shows the ratio of median income to median housing price going back to the late 60s. And what you can see is up through the late 60s, housing was relatively affordable relative to median incomes, so there really wasn't a housing crisis or issues. But through the 80s and 90s, and then with the subprime mortgage crisis in around 2006 or so, housing started to become more and more expensive relative to incomes, became more and more unaffordable. After that housing crisis, it declined, but since that time, it's continued to increase. So housing affordability has become an issue of greater importance. If people were fortunate enough to have bought housing in the late 60s, early 70s, or even in the 80s to get into the housing ladder, the housing market, good for them. They were very fortunate, but that's not the scenario today for their kids or relatives or for many other people in the community. And the chart on the bottom of the page also is important as well. So what this shows is the production of housing units in the United States since 1960 on. And realistically, you can see that for economic and other reasons, the production of housing has exceeded the average in some years and been below the average in others. But after the subprime mortgage crisis, financing dried up, and as a result, housing didn't get produced. And if you compare it to the historical average in the nation, we underproduced about 12 million housing units that we really needed. And that's a reason, again, why housing prices have increased. So this information is in the plan to help people understand, if you will, how we got to a situation that we're preparing this document. So there are housing affordability issues specific to Rocky Hill. There are existing households which are cost burdened. The concept of cost burdened is that housing is consuming more of your income more than about 30% of your income. And as a result, it now starts to take funds away from food, from medical care, from transportation, from vacations, from all sorts of other things. And so it's considered to be a possible burden. And what we see here in this data is that there could be 7,000 or 8,000 households in Rocky Hill overall, and about 3,700 of them are housing cost burdened. And so that's a significant number, and these are people that could be struggling a little bit with housing costs overall. Other affordability issues mean that housing affordable to employees of local businesses may not be available in the community. So people, have to drive in, and we complain about traffic congestion. So, or you go to Dunkin' Donuts for coffee, and the people who are working behind the counter may be making modest wages and can't afford to live in town. On the top of page 7, The United Way in Connecticut has developed what they call an ALICE index. ALICE means asset limited, income constrained, and employed. These are working people who don't have a lot of assets and can struggle with the cost of housing, of daycare, of all sorts of other situations. And according to the United Way data, about 22% of the households in Rocky Hill meet the ALICE criteria. So 1 in 5 people could be struggling with the costs of housing overall. And then lastly, I think the idea that housing can also provide a gateway to better opportunities in the community for current residents and for family and others. On page 8, we start to get into what is affordable housing. This starts to get to be higher mathematics pretty quickly. The basic concept is that we care most about housing affordability for people who earn below average incomes. We talk about the area median income, and also people who are at 80% or 60% of area median income. And so for a family of 4 in the Hartford area, which includes Rocky Hill, the median income is about $112,000 a year. 80% of AMI is about $90,000. 60% is about $67,000. If there's only 2 people in the household, the numbers are less. And then what that translates to in terms of rental rates and sale prices. So that's what affordable housing means in Rocky Hill, housing that would be available at these sale prices or rental rates. So there's 2 different categories there, one of which we might call naturally occurring affordable housing. These are housing units which naturally sell or rent at these prices. And so over on page 9, the census data seems to indicate that Rocky Hill may have had about 5,000 naturally occurring affordable housing units in the community. And the reason I say may have had is that the information that's available, the best information that's available to us, is the 5-year average leading up to 2020. So we're already 2 years past that. And if you think of the 5-year average, we're 5 years past that average. And I think we all know what's happened to housing prices over the last 5 years. So we do have some naturally occurring affordable housing, but housing prices have escalated significantly since 2020. Many of the units are not restricted to affordable prices. And I think the last statement on the bottom of page 9, the state keeps track of what they count as affordable housing units, and units which are not deed restricted to affordable prices don't count to the state list. So how many units do we have? On page 10 is the math used by the state of Connecticut. They've identified 454 units in their 2022 report that exist in Rocky Hill. There are 235 units of what they call assisted housing. There are 62 units of rental assistance housing. These are circumstances where a household receives funds from the state or federal government so that they don't pay more than 30% of their income, but they rent a housing unit somewhere in the community, and the state makes up the difference. We have 62 of those in Rocky Hill. In addition, the latest data for Rocky Hill indicated that there were 157 units of CHFA mortgages. These are mortgage instruments that people would qualify for. They offer beneficial interest rates, lower down payments, et cetera. You would qualify for those. And because 157 households chose to live in Rocky Hill, we get credit for that 157. So between the 235 units of assisted housing, 62 units of rental assistance, 157 units of CHFA mortgages, that brings us to 454 units total. And so the math is 5.13%. The state threshold for the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure, which I think the Commission's familiar with based on a recent application to you, is 10%. So if we are below 10%, we are subject to the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure. If we're above 10%, we're not. I have a little piece of bad news for you, which is the state is still, the 2020 census results are not going to be released until May of next year, which means that the state does their math on the 2010 housing count. So in other words, if you look at the bottom of page 10, they take 454 units out of the 8,843 units in town in 2010, and our math comes out to 5.13%. The preliminary 2020 estimate is 9,319 units. So as soon as they report that, our percentage goes down to 4.87. So the numbers are always going to be in flux, and that's just something to keep in mind. On page 11 is just a chart to show, excuse me, where Rocky Hill, I got one, thank you.
Okay.
Where Rocky Hill compares to other communities of similar population and similar affordable housing percentages. We're not alone. We're not an outlier, but there is a significant need for affordable housing in communities across the state, and that's how Rocky Hill fits into the matrix. Why is, on page 12 and 13, why is the affordable housing appeals procedure relevant? Again, it's because developers can come in and not have to comply with our zoning regulations. And while they're providing affordable housing units, which goes into the calculation, they're also providing market rate units, which also go into the equation. And so the math is constantly changing. If Rocky Hill said, well, we would prefer not to be subject to the affordable housing appeals procedure, there's two ways that can happen. One of which is producing enough units to get above the 10% threshold. And on page 13, the math estimates it's about 454 units today, and we'd need to add 478 more units to become exempt. So that would definitely be a long-term goal. And don't forget the math will always change, because if you add affordable units, but people are still building other housing units in the community, so the number is subject to change. The other option is that Rocky Hill could get a 4-year moratorium through the production of units that add what are known as housing unit equivalent points. And if we were to add 186 housing unit equivalent points, Rocky Hill would get a 4-year moratorium. And there are communities around the state that have done this, and communities around the state that have gotten successive moratoria. So those could be other ways for us to approach this particular situation. Any questions before I move on to section 3?
So just on that, the housing unit equivalent points, can you just give just a little detail as to how you
Yep. So
calculate and how we can?
this is, it's almost like a setup. It seems like Dimple, but if you go to page 31, and I'm not going to switch the presentation to page 31, but here in the appendix in the glossary of terms, on page 31, we have a table of how you might get housing unit equivalent points. So, for example, if we were to create one housing unit affordable at 80% of AMI, and it's a for sale unit, we would have one housing unit equivalent point. On the other hand, if that unit at the same income level is rented, we get 1.5 housing unit equivalent points. You'll see or notice from here down at the bottom or up above in the line, elderly units only get 0.5 point. And oftentimes communities prefer to build elderly units, but in fact, that's not really where the need is, and so the state gives you 0.5 point for those. But if you were to build a unit rented and affordable at 40% of AMI, for each unit you build, you get 2.5 points. So it's a matrix that could, be configured in different ways to produce units in the future.
So for 8-30G, it should be, is that 60?
Say that again.
60% AMI?
Well, the points, according to the statute, are available at 40%, 60%, and 80% of AMI.
Okay. Because 8-30G is,
830G is a set-aside development, which is also defined in the glossary here.
oh, okay.
And that's where at least 30% of the units have to be restricted, half of those at 80%, half of those at 60%.
So it's a mixture of 2 and 1. Okay.
I thought I read somewhere where the CHFA eligible units fall out of the equation when you're doing the housing unit equivalent points.
They do not count to the housing unit equivalent points. So you have to produce
And
units.
that's 157.
Well, and I think the challenge is, what we're also seeing in some communities around the state is that people who perhaps got a CHFA mortgage 5 or 10 years ago, saw the housing increase, realized that whatever equity they had in the house, they were about to make money. They sold the unit, and the purchaser didn't necessarily qualify. So that number in some communities has been decreasing somewhat dramatically because people are seeing the opportunity to refinance or cash out, and the mortgage disappears, and then we don't get points anymore.
Yeah, plus we had that long stretch of extremely low interest rates.
Yes. So it was advantageous for people. We might all have done the same thing, right? If there's an opportunity to refinance, pay less money, and pocket it, and get out of the CHFA, you might do it. But what that means for us, from an affordable housing perspective, is that our percentage goes down.
Just a quick question. If a proposal was put through to build, say, 200 units, and a percentage was affordable, the other units, it doesn't balance. So you almost need to, the way I'm interpreting it is, that you almost need to convert existing units in town to affordable housing to actually get this number to go up, because new growth doesn't really benefit the town if just a small percentage is going toward affordable.
So, excellent point. If we're adding new units and there's no affordable units being provided, all the new units go to the denominator and our percentage goes down. If we add units at 10%, we're basically sort of keeping track, if you will, in terms of the state's math and calculations, but we're not gaining any ground. So if we were able to find scenarios where we could get more than 10%, that means now our numbers are going up. Because, as you point out, if those are existing units, they're on the ground, they're already in the denominator, we put them in the numerator, and boom, our percentage can go up. And you'll see as we talk about strategies later that that's something that the plan recommends. It's hard to do. We got to find money to be able to do that, but it could help us.
But just like he was stating about the mortgage, this is from 2010, there was a lot of properties that were sold.
Mhm.
So that number, I mean, it decreased like 43 units. It could actually decrease by a lot.
It could. I think if we look at the data on page 10, bear with me just for a second. So on page 10, we have the chart that tells us where we're getting our points today. So the Housing Authority has 70 units, and we're pretty sure that they're not going anywhere, right? They're here, they own the units, so we're pretty solid with the 70 units.
Right.
The other units, which are the Greenfield Village Co-op, there's 10 units there. I think it's, I read the deed on that. I think it's reasonable to expect that those units will be there for some time. That's good. Elms Common is a little bit different in terms of why it's on the list. Those units are not necessarily rented at affordable prices, but they're reported by HUD as being part of the list. So
We take it.
how rock solid are those? I'm not sure. We'll count them as long as HUD does, but, and then we're subject to the variation. So if you said to me, where in this list are we likely to make the greatest increases in the future? And I think it's on the box down towards the bottom, which says deed restricted housing. We have no units there today, but I think the applications which may come before the commission in the future or activities which may come in are more likely to be deed restricted than the other categories and that number will start to grow.
And we have a project now that's got at least 20, right? The Ames development had 10.
Yes, 10%.
20, and those were going to be deed restricted, right?
Yes.
Right.
Right, but if you look at that, we lost 37 units in the CHFA, and that was in 2010, so in your opinion, you think that number is going to go up?
What, the CHFA?
Yeah?
It's hard to say. CHFA is continuing to offer the programs. They are continuing to try to find ways to make it relevant and pertinent. People could get CHFA financing and move to Weathersfield or Glastonbury or any other community. So when we talk a little bit later in the strategies about how might we encourage them to come to Rocky Hill, we're a great community. There's a lot to offer here. And if people would locate here, then our numbers go up. And we're addressing a housing need. So
It's by choice. When people come here, then it's going to help.
And I think the survey results showed that people sometimes, there are a number of people in the survey who came here into their first house and stayed in the community and continued to sort of trade up. So somebody might come here with a CHFA mortgage and then trade up to a house elsewhere in Rocky Hill, et cetera. So it's part of the housing conversation, if you will, in terms of these types of issues. So then, just moving ahead to section 3 of the report, what does the POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development, say about affordable housing? It identifies the issue about a diverse housing portfolio, the importance of recognizing and protecting the existing neighborhoods, and then also looking at ways to provide for diverse housing options for an aging population, for people of modest incomes, et cetera. And the residential densities map, which is on page 15, shows where multifamily housing is in the community today. And these are areas that might be appropriate for multifamily housing in the future. So the plan's supportive of addressing situations related to affordable housing. On pages 16, 17, 18, and 19, we summarize the results of the survey. On page 16, just some basic demographics in terms of people who responded, the neighborhoods that they were from, et cetera. On the bottom of page 17, residents were most supportive of housing options and choices affordable to moderate income workers, such as teachers, police, fire, emergency, medical, et cetera, in Rocky Hill. The next categories that they felt supportive of were younger persons and older persons, and then housing authority units, housing options and choices for people who want to downsize. The least support was for persons with lower incomes. And these are actually partially buried in the other categories. So unfortunately, it reflects a little bias against housing for people of more modest incomes. But these, in fact, can also be the teachers, the firemen, the workers, et cetera. So I think it's really important as part of housing how we frame the questions and the policies. We asked questions in the survey about people's support for different strategies. So on pages 18 and 19, we asked people whether they strongly agreed, somewhat agreed, weren't sure, somewhat disagreed, or strongly disagreed with some different statements. And now they're organized here on pages 18 and 19 as to things that people, from things people supported more to things that they supported less. So 82% of participants felt that guiding the design of housing options so it fits into Rocky Hill was important. 60% felt that more housing options and choices in and near the town center would help support local businesses and maintain a vibrant, walkable, mixed-use area. 57% thought that town-owned properties could be evaluated for their use in addressing housing options. 56% supported allowing residential uses on the upper floors of business buildings along the Silestein Highway and Route 3. 56% supported housing options and choices in areas served by public water and public sewer. 50% thought that housing options would make Rocky Hill an even better place. And now the numbers go below 50% in terms of agree. So 49% thought affordable housing options and choices should be located in all areas of Rocky Hill. So not a majority, but still a fair amount of support. 46% that Rocky Hill should seek ways to increase the number of affordable housing units. 45% require new affordable units. 44% encourage new affordable units. 42% that the town should actually create the affordable units. And surprisingly, at least from my perspective, 34% supported the concept of establishing a special town housing fund. So you'll notice as we get back into the plan still recommends that we do that, but I think people might be concerned there that the taxation money, tax money, if you will, tax revenue, will go to this fund, and that's not necessarily the case.
It looks like even though that number is low, that's, as we discussed before, that's what may help in converting existing ones or new ones that are coming in, and, right? I mean, that helps create.
And this was the question that had the largest of not sure. So there's about 25%, that orange band on page 19 on question 12. So they're not sure. They sort of need more information. And I think that that's something worthy of further discussion.
It's not in here, but what, is it possible to, rather than a housing fund, to create a tax incentive to existing multifamily units where they maintain a certain level, for the number, X number, the more units they maintain in an affordable price scheme, that they would get some type of tax benefit out of it? Then you don't have to pre-fund it, you don't have to hold that money out.
Yep.
Because I know from experience in town that, that certain multifamily housing, if the existing residents, the property managers have these set standards where they keep raising the price for those existing owners at a relatively large rate, to the point where that person has to move and leave. They're almost literally forcing people into an unaffordable apartment for the same apartment they started with. But when the new renter comes in, it goes back to goes back to square one, and they start over again. It doesn't seem to. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to.
So if we were able to transport ourselves back to the 1960s, we would find a scenario where what you would charge for rent relative to incomes was fairly well balanced. We transport ourselves through to what I described, I think it was back on page 9 of the big gap, right? We've underproduced 12 million housing units in this country. So a landlord is now in a situation like, I'm sorry, if you can't afford it, I'll find somebody who can, and likely they will. And that's why housing prices jumped, which created the crisis we find ourselves in today. So I think the issue is that for many years, we thought housing would take care of itself. And I think what we're learning now is that perhaps we should be paying more attention to housing-related issues in the community to help address this issue. If nobody can afford to live here, what happens? And so that becomes part of the challenge.
Yeah. So if we had a high vacancy rate, we'd have more affordability, but that's not the case.
No, and I think the question is, what would the prices end up still being, right? And you can see where developers are building houses with what price points, et cetera.
But I mean, it looks like it's, and I know we have been talking about the units are not there, the single family or whatever, the housing units, it's still, not there. However, if you look at like homelessness versus how many people are in apartments or condos or whatever, they're still absorbed, right? I mean, so I'm trying to understand, like, if we say that there is no, affordable units or housing units available because of lack of what we, didn't build, like, millions of units that were not built. But people still have homes. I mean, when I say homes, well, so it's not like 100,000 people are, somewhere where they don't have a roof on their
But it's
head,
not, but it's not necessarily homelessness. That's not the only result. But I think if we go back to some of the earlier data, what we find out is that there's a number of households that are housing cost burdened. In other words, people are doubling up,
yes,
tripling up, and
yes.
doing other things like that.
Right.
Overcrowding can occur. The issue is people need housing, and so they're going to struggle to find housing to meet their needs. And the housing cost burden is very real. I mean,
Yes.
you listen to the radio or TV these days and what's happening with inflation. And so for people, perhaps on fixed incomes, what is that going to mean for people if housing prices and food prices and everything continue to go up? People won't be able to afford housing.
Yeah, so they're cutting everywhere else to have a roof on their head.
Right, and you can only do that for so long, right?
long,
So the question, in a sense, is I think for many years we thought housing took care of itself, and I think keeping an eye on housing and perhaps diversifying might be strategies for us to think about for the future. So I think this leads us now into page 20, which is chapter 4 and possible housing strategies going forward for Rocky Hill. The first part here is really about organizing housing efforts. And I think there's 3 key recommendations under guiding organizing housing efforts. The first of which is to consider establishing a municipal committee. So planning and zoning has regulatory responsibilities. You don't really have the time to be advocating for housing solutions, et cetera. There could be scenarios in the future. I mean, towns in Connecticut are being required to establish fair rent commissions. There's all sorts of issues going on here. And in Rocky Hill, who's this going to be? Who's going to coordinate and marshal these efforts? So recommendation number 1 is consider establishing an affordable housing committee in some of the tasks that they might undertake. And they could recommend ways to implement this plan. And 5 years, we need a new plan. The state requires it. So somebody's going to have to prepare that, and it might be them next time, not planning and zoning. So recommendation number 1 is we need a committee to kind of oversee these efforts.
So we already have Rocky Hill Housing Authority, right? That has been set up by statute and all that stuff, right? So could that replace what we are talking about?
I would say no.
Municipal committee?
So a housing authority is a quasi-public entity. Statutes require that municipalities have them. Once they're established, they're not really under the town's umbrella. They have independent statutory authority to receive funds, build, own, and manage units. But in terms of an advocacy group in housing as a whole, not really their cup of tea.
Okay.
So I think from my experience with housing authorities around the state, that's not the entity. We can rely on them to manage what they have. And I think in Rocky Hill, there actually are some challenges that our housing authority is facing right now. The units are old, in need of rehabilitation, and we certainly need more units. The waiting list is very long.
Yeah.
So they've got more on their plate right now than they can handle. So I would say it needs to be. Now, Rocky Hill has recently set up a committee on diversity and inclusion.
Yep.
Could they be that group? I mean, they've got other issues to deal with, so we might not want to, but maybe we would. So I think this is an issue that we would sort of move up the food chain a little bit for the town council and others to think about how we might do this, because they're probably going to need some staff assistance, et cetera. So you'll notice here that in the table, the leaders and partners are TC, which is town council, and TM, which is town manager. That how we might approach this is something we're going to task them with. The Planning and Zoning Commission can't do this. We're going to have to run it up the food chain. The next strategy here is establish a special housing fund, and this is the conversation we had earlier about a housing trust fund. I don't know how that would be funded over time. Some communities are doing it through grants. Some communities are doing it through gifts and bequests. Some communities are doing it through a zoning permit fee. I don't know how Rocky Hill should do it. My first recommendation is set up this accounting bucket, and maybe it'll have $1 in it, but it's there so that when funding comes along, we have a place to put it and dedicate it to housing. So I think job one is create the fund, and then we can figure out later, either through the Affordable Housing Committee or somebody else, how we can make effective use of that in the future. And most communities around the state are setting these up, and they're being quite creative. So job one is create the fund and then figure out the details later.
I mean, we have seen in the past, town had provided incentives to businesses, right? So how did that happen? I mean, it's not like there were extra money sitting, but they had to create that, and probably that came from taxpayers and, all that, right? So I think it's a similar concept. So we have done it for businesses to incentivize them to come to Rocky Hill, right? Create jobs and taxes and whatever. So I think this is another way of, and again, the incentive is different for the town. For businesses, it's jobs and taxes and stuff for the town. Here, we are talking about affordable housing and meeting certain requirements and goals, and I think it may not monetarily, it may not look attractive, but we are meeting some other goals, right? I think that's.
And I think the funds can become available. You think about the subdivision regulations, for example, which allow for a fee in lieu of open space,
Right.
which is, we look at a situation, we say that there's really no open space on this parcel that really would, enhance our open space system in Rocky Hill, or maybe we might say that. But imagine a situation now where affordable housing may or may not work on a site, or actually think about a fractional. We were talking about, fractional units and rounding up and rounding down. What if a fractional unit was actually a payment into the housing trust fund? So the crazy thing is this, the math works like this. If we had somebody who did a 9-lot development or a 9-unit development, and the affordable housing set-aside requirement was 10%, they have to provide 1 unit. At 10 units, they also have to do that. At 11 units, if you round up, now there has to be 2 affordable units, so they're right back to 9 market and 2 affordable. And so there can be some steps, if you will, in the process that economically are like almost punishing and will adversely affect development. On the other hand, there might be a way that Rocky Hill could look at that and figure out a way to enhance the housing trust fund, use those funds for housing rehab for existing units or deed restrictions or other things like that would perhaps get us to a place where we're continuing to preserve affordable units in the future. So those are all conversations, I think, for the Affordable Housing Committee, but job one is set up the bucket, which is the account.
You referenced grant money.
Yep.
Is that, I'm not 100% sure, but is there anybody in the town that actually looks at grants that applies for them? I guess that'd be a question for staff.
Currently, we have a consultant that's working with the town and has gone to various departments to find out, okay, what is your wish list? Pie in the sky. I mean, just shout out ideas. Nothing's off limits, and we've talked about this as well. But there is a consultant that we have. In the past, Ray did a lot of our grants. Ray Carpentino, who's now our town manager. I know I worked with him on small cities grants through the years, through 90s on up, to deal with our housing authority property and some of the issues they have. But that's who we're using now. And then various departments basically researching what's out there.
Now, are you talking about town giving out grants from its funding? I mean, that
We don't know where
that
grants
could
may.
be,
may come from in the future on this. Housing is a bigger issue. I know that CHFA is investigating new possibilities. Had a conversation with regard to what are known as the Community Reinvestment Act. Banks are required to demonstrate that they are helping to address the housing needs in their communities. And so sometimes banks at the end of the year haven't done as much as perhaps they should. So they look to provide money. Here you go. And if we have a bucket that says contribute to ours, we get money that we could use for advanced planning for the housing authority to add more units at their sites, or things that we might struggle to fund within the municipal finance world or the housing authority finance world. But if we can pre-front the money for the design that then comes back in state and federal funds, we jump the line in terms of the production of units. So there's just flexibility from having a fund dedicated to housing, much like we might have a fund dedicated to open space. So I think it's a prudent move financially, fiscally. Even if there's only $1 in it at the beginning, it could grow over time. On page 21, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's quite possible that the growth of housing in Rocky Hill in the future will come from deed-restricted units. I think it's important for the town to start thinking about how we're going to manage these deed-restricted units. You have none today, so you don't have any experience with this. But each deed-restricted unit is required to have or development is required to have a housing affordability plan, which says who the eligible people are, what the sale prices or rental rates are. And if the math is different between different developments and we're not paying attention, it's going to get out of control very quickly. On the other hand, if Rocky Hill said, we've got a model, everybody's going to use this model, and unless you can convince us why we shouldn't. If you've got a good reason, we'll consider it. But I just think for the future, having a housing affordability plan is a good idea. Having consistent deed restrictions, which go on the land records, is a good idea. And the commission or the Affordable Housing Committee approving the administrator, which is the third party who's supposed to watch what's going on here and making sure eligible people are paying appropriate rents and sale prices. Because if it ever gets off the rails, the unit disappears. So I think that these are procedures for the Affordable Housing Committee, I think, to get a jump on fairly quickly.
Are deed restricted, is a deed restricted option entirely feasible or manageable for a town? I just ask the question because it doesn't seem to be entirely within our span of control to make sure that you approve a project under the promise of a deed restriction, and you're expecting that you're going to get that number of credits in your affordability plan. And they may send you a report, and they may say, oh yeah, we're doing this, this, and that. But in reality, for some reason, you're not getting all the credits that either the state has access to information that we don't have or something. Yeah, where the state may not have information. I mean, we may not have the information we need to know whether we're still getting those, say, 20 units or whatever the case may be.
This is why I would recommend a third-party administrator.
Oh, okay.
So I did find a situation in another municipality where a builder developer's receptionist was the administrator. Not good. Okay, does not have, I think in my conversations with the Department of Housing, the administrator needs to be qualified, capable, and durable. Right? Qualified and capable, they have the expertise to do this, and durable means it's not somebody who's going to quit their job next week and disappear. It's somebody who's going to be around. The housing authority actually does this for their units, so for a small fee, they could verify it's an eligible person and the sale price or rental rate qualifies. Perfect. Or there are third-party administrators around the state to do this. So we haven't had to do this yet, and I would think that Kim has the understanding to be able to do this, but she's got many other responsibilities. So the issue is, it shouldn't be the town, it shouldn't be the developer, it should be an independent third party that signs off on every transaction. The deed restrictions are in place for 40 years or longer.
But in order to maintain some level of accountability, doesn't And we have developers coming in that are not from this state, you know, they're from another state, and they are legal ready for whatever comes down the pike that they want to fight. Wouldn't we have to have a contract in place to know that that's a solid promise on their end, that they would have some type of contract on disclosures and in place prior to approving a project?
Well, I think this is where the housing affordability plan comes in. So I think the three elements go hand in hand here. The affordability plan, you may have seen one as part of the application, I believe that is before the commission right now today. And imagine that was now the model for the town. Maybe not, but maybe it is.
Rather than talk about a current application, we can talk about the Ames application.
Ames had,
That was
Yeah. There
you
approved,
go.
that's an approved project. We
Thank
have
you.
22 deed-restricted units. There was a plan presented as part of their preliminary work with the town, long before an application even came in. Their legal entity worked with our town attorney and actually reviewing it and putting it together. And that was part of their submission for the 22 deed-restricted units. So that will be in place as the project gets going.
So is it being put on a deed? Is
In
that,
the mic.
I'm sorry, it being on a deed, is that considered them meeting their obligation?
So the housing affordability plan sets the rules up. Who's eligible to occupy the units, what the sale price or rental rate will be. So that each transaction that happens has to be reviewed and approved by the third-party administrator. This is what the affordability plan and the deed restrictions should say. If owner A decides that they would like to sell the unit and owner B buys it, owner B is buying it knowing what the restrictions are on the property and the remaining period. So I think that those three, particularly if the town has model, and the town attorney has already worked on one. So we're probably 50% of the way, or maybe more, as to where we might be on this. I think that the administration of it is the type of thing that we have the basic tools together to make that happen.
But the only contract language we have is what's written as a deed restriction, right?
I don't think the statutes, there is a provision, and I think it's an 8-2 something or other, which provides for a contract. That was a provision adopted many years ago that really didn't work out well for towns. So I don't think a contract, I'll defer to the town attorney on this one. I think that the requirement for a third-party administrator to monitor these developments for the town, submit monthly or annual reports to say, over the course of last year, there were 12 tenant changes, and all were qualified, all rental rates, and I'm on top of this, but they're all good.
Who would be required to hire the third party? Would they be working for the town, or would they be working for the developer?
I think that the requirement in the affordability plan is for an administrator. Somebody has to be designated to monitor this. Over the 30-something years that 830G has been around, there have been some municipalities that ignored this and didn't monitor, and some units got sold, and the title search wasn't done well, and so affordable units were sold at market rate prices. You don't want that. So that's why the requirement is that no unit can sell or rent without a sign-off from the administrator. So this is where the model housing affordability plan, the deed restrictions, would spell this out and make sure that that unit stays affordable for the appropriate term.
So this third party will be working for the town,
It's a
It would
third
be-
party working for,
would be hired by the town.
no, it's not hired by the town. It would be a transactional basis, either paid for by the developer or by the person who's, renting the unit or something, but they're an independent auditor.
Okay.
and I think the affordability, for affordable plan that they submit should have those, does have those requirements. So we can clarify in those things, like who is going to manage these and all that.
And I think I mean, for the past 30 years, affordability plans have been a little bit of the Wild West because developers have written what they wanted and nobody's really kind of watched it. And I think now all 169 municipalities in Connecticut need to start thinking about this and having consistent procedures in place. I think will avoid, mitigate, minimize problems in the future and move us in a positive direction.
So along those lines, maybe what we do as part of appendix to this, our plan, we have exhibits that provides the model that we would like to see,
Yeah, so I think I've given or suggested that here on page 21, the leaders and partners of the Affordable Housing Commission, they can come back with suggestions as to how this can happen, and if the town attorney has worked on this, maybe we got a jump start. You'll notice that strategy 3 in this group here says, adopt requirements in the zoning regs that such standard documents be used, and the PZC review and approve any administrator. So you say, as part of the application in your zoning, this is any affordable housing application in town, it's going to use the model housing affordability plan unless we agree on something different. You're going to use and designate an administrator, and we have the right to review any change. So if you start off with John Doe and you want to change it to Jane Smith, you, as the commission, would have the ability, is Jane Smith qualified, capable, and durable? Yes or no? And I think that's, again, belt and suspenders to make sure that this works the way that we intend.
Yeah, I mean, you say straight out here, establish standard municipal documents and procedures. So seems, the devil in the details that we're not going to sort out tonight.
Correct.
Seem for this type of project, it's got to have more meat to it and some teeth.
Yeah.
For enforcement.
And I would think that the commission would, whatever the Affordable Housing Committee, the town attorney comes up with, you would want to read through and say, yeah, answers all our questions, we're good to go. I would not want you to go into the future without recognizing the importance of these standard documents. And then lastly, on this page, number 4, is to consider over the long term the possibility of extending the deed restrictions. Right now, the statute says that the minimum time period under an 830G is 40 years. But after 40 years, if those units disappear, we have to replace those units. What if the units automatically renewed at the end of 40 years? These are issues to be explored, I think, in the future. I don't think we should decide that today. It might be something for you to think about for the future.
Keep it simple, for the life of the building.
We're dealing with property rights here. We
Yeah.
can deal with situations where buildings can age over time. And the issue is, it's going to renew for 40 years unless you make a cogent case to the town why you want to buy it out. Money could go into the housing trust fund. The affordability restrictions disappear. But now we can do something better. But rather than just have the units vaporized at the end of 40 years might be something you might want to consider.
Oh, you actually say life of the unit. Oh, I thought I was being creative.
I mean, I think it's good to see, I don't know if housing has, DOH has that statistics as to, okay, for this municipality, they had 1,000 units in, 1960 or whatever, 1970. And now they have 500 or 200. Because I think that goes, because again, in order to meet the 10%, if something is gone, you have to start building again. And it's,
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So on page 22 and 23 here are our next set of strategies. On page 22, it suggests looking at ways to guide the design of affordable housing and guide the location of affordable housing. I think you may recall when I talked about the survey results, I think it was 80% of people in Rocky Hills said, as long as affordable housing sort of fits into the character of town, we're much more comfortable with that. So can we look at ways to encourage or require that? I think it's a delicate topic. as part of Public Act 2129, which I know the commission has heard about, there was a provision in that act which created a commission on Connecticut's development and future. They broke into working groups to look at different issues, and one of those working groups is looking at design issues. So they're going to come out with a report supposedly in the next couple of months, but it may take them a little bit longer. But there might be some design strategies in there that we could use or employ in Rocky Hill. So and then the location, if the commission has thoughts or ideas about Silestine Highway, Route 3, Town Center, these types of scenarios, that those could be things, again, to help guide the location of affordable housing in town.
So, just for discussion, like how would this would there be a conflict with 20-129?
21-29, yeah.
Yeah, would that, because they said, you can't look at characteristics or character. Now we are putting these things in, and in our regular zoning, we removed those as part of our amendments because of that particular statute. So I'm just thinking out loud, like, does that conflict when we say these things in our plan?
There's still communities around the state that have design review procedures. There are still communities around the state, and the statutes allow for the commission to consider site characteristics rather than the word character.
Right.
So I think, and the state has appointed this committee and charged it with looking at these issues. So I think it's an area that's evolving. I think it is a bit of a challenge with affordable housing because you couldn't necessarily require a gold roof, right? Because that's going to make it unaffordable. So, but most developers want to get approval. So if you said, there are colonial designs. The cover of this plan is pictures of all of the multifamily developments throughout Rocky Hill. So you can start to get a sense in there that there's some variation, but there's also some flavors which are, carry through. So maybe that's stay within this envelope and you're good.
And within that realm, wasn't there also a statement that said you can't make, they're trying to eliminate arbitrary and capricious decision-making based on undefined parameters of characteristic, whatever that may be. But then didn't they follow it with a statement unless explicitly stated in the planning and zoning regulations so that, if you say that, buildings need to be, well, if you were in a historic district, I'm thinking of a historic district like Weathersfield, you're not going to put up a building in the historic section of Weathersfield that doesn't meet their specific historic district requirements. So.
I think this is an evolving area. I would urge you to wait to see what this committee that the legislature established comes up with. And is that a starting point for Rocky Hill to evaluate this, or perhaps not? I can tell you that in the survey results, residents felt strongly about this issue. Whether we have all the tools at our disposal is probably something that's going to evolve over time. So keep an eye on it, because I think it could be important.
So probably this will be amended as statutes are amended.
Well, yeah, it could be. On page 23, the strategy here is to increase assisted housing.
Could we go back to guide the location?
Sure.
Of affordable housing?
Yep.
On B, on page 22, one of the things that we're seeing, and you'll be seeing it next month in a zoning regulation amendment, we have a application coming up before the commission where they want to repurpose a underutilized office building. This was something we talked about before in meetings, is to reutilize some of the vacant office space along Silestine Highway, for example. It's in a commercial zone, and I've had requests from 3 property owners already, met on a preliminary basis with 3 property owners along Silestine Highway, where they have talked to us on a preliminary basis about reconverting some of the office space to either residential, all residential, and I immediately asked for affordable housing, or a mixed-use combination of office and residential, and I immediately asked for affordable housing. So you have some interest in the property owners wanting to do this as well, so I see this as a viable option, especially since the workforce is changing because of COVID. Certainly has had a big thing to do with it, with more people working from home, or we have the actually office buildings being built and constructed where you can rent an office or rent a room to do some work for a few hours a day, and then someone else can come in for a few extra hours a day, afterwards, and they have shared workspace. So this certainly, I think, is a viable option. We have the interest, and I think we should certainly consider.
Was this outside the town center district?
Correct, yes,
Outside, okay.
yes.
I mean, that might be one of the, strategies where if they are proposing these type of changes, that you look at other zoning requirements and relax those zoning requirements for that type of project, right? I mean,
You could.
like parking or.
Plus, these are existing buildings. That's one good thing. These are existing buildings also. We
But-
also have some requests. We had a request recently for an area, it wasn't along Celestine Highway, it was in Corporate Ridge. Someone came in and said, we want to explore this kind of nebulous thing about housing in what had been an office park.
Yep.
That in its day was a fine example of Class A office space, but they're not doing that now.
So if we were more specific about it and said that we just like we do in the town center district, we give the authorities to the Planning and Zoning Commission to offer exemptions if certain criteria are met. If we were in certain zones that don't have any type of residential use, approved use, we could possibly do similar language like we have in the town center district and say that, consideration would be given to any developments in these areas that meet these criteria.
So the verb that's in here, and I think verbs are always important when you're preparing a plan, so the verb here is investigate. I think as Kim has pointed out, you're likely to have an application appear before you in the not-too-distant future that's going to address this. A developer is going to apply for what they think works for them and their project, and you might sort of look at it and say, as Kim has said, maybe affordable housing should be a requirement here. What should the percentage be? Is this location okay? And you might consider that there's a difference between an office park and then an area which is a mixed-use active area. So these are issues the commission's going to have to grapple with. But if an application comes before you, you're going to have to review it with your legislative hat on, excuse me, I apologize, and investigate. You'll notice here that the leaders and partners, excuse me, are you and the Affordable Housing Committee. You guys are really in the lead probably on this. But I think there's a difference between, as we were talking earlier, if new housing gets built, you're adding numbers to the numerator and the denominator. If an office building or becomes a mixed-use building, you're adding to the numerator, you're not, and that same number goes to the denominator. The units that are added, some percentage of those are sort of affordable, but, it's a different equation, if you will. So this is why I think it probably does involve some thought, and I think that's a good strategy to build a strong community, because it could add to the livability in Rocky Hill overall, et cetera, support businesses and so on.
I think there's a typo, is it 3A, Route 3A, under,
Under B on that same page 22,
page 22.
Oh,
highways and Route 3.
yeah. Oh, good catch. Thank you.
But, I do believe it's not going to be if we have an application. I think it's going to be when we have applications, and I'll put an S on that because I believe we have at least 2 that will be coming in.
I mean, right, and I think we want to show that Rocky Hill is open to affordable housing and open to looking at different things, different options and all that, right? I mean, that's why we have this plan, and
You'll have some flexibility, too. I was just, based on a comment that Kim made a few minutes ago, the parking requirement for office space is probably 4 spaces per 1,000, right? But 1,000 square feet of office space is going to get you, what, 1.5 unit, whatever. And a unit might, depending on its configuration, might have 1 to 2 spaces.
Yep.
So a site could have expansion potential for additional development, which could be economic development for the town. So it's a redevelopment choice as well, and the design could be altered in a very attractive way. So there's all sorts of ways that this could play out. So I think when an application comes in, you'll have the chance to investigate. Page 23, I think, is actually an important one as well. I think the Housing Authority is doing the best they can with the resources they have available, the units they have. I'm not sure that they have the appropriate amount of staffing for the amount of work that they have. So it almost seems to me like we're running it on not a shoestring, but there is tremendous opportunity, I think, in Rocky Hill to add units, to meet some of the more difficult housing needs at lower levels of affordability. The Housing Authority is an entity that can help us significantly in this regard. Most of the units that they have right now, the 70, were built back in the 60s and 70s as one-story units with outside access. So you want to go visit your friend in the middle of a snowstorm and you're elderly? That's not a comfortable walk. A number of communities around the state are looking now at the possibilities of merging the units, replacing these one-floor independent units with a building with a common hallway and a recreation room or a gathering room or something else like that. And since it's much more efficient on the land, you can increase the number of units significantly. So I think the Housing Authority is an opportunity area for the town, but they probably need assistance from the town and encourage them to get the funding and everything else to move ahead, possibly even investigate the possibility of acquiring adjacent land to help support their longer-term efforts, et cetera. But right now, they're a little bit of an orphan, I think, in terms of the community, and they could be a key entity moving forward. So I wish there was even a stronger verb in terms of increase, but supporting the Housing Authority in their efforts, I think, is a key opportunity area here for the town.
So as you mentioned before, and you have it here, consider a special housing fund. So that special housing fund could be used to fix and preserve the units we have, improve them, and possibly increase them.
It could, but I also think that there's opportunities for them. They have been getting small cities grants.
Yeah, we've done at least two or three small cities block grants for fire alarm system upgrades, ADA.
HVAC.
Yeah.
Shower, bathrooms, et
Yeah,
cetera.
ADA capabilities.
But the units are still 40, 50, 60 years old. They're not getting any better, and they're still inefficiently designed. So they're
Very long waiting list.
Very
Years,
long waiting list.
Years.
So maybe we look at, instead of 1-story, 2-story or 3-story, you demo it and build it one at a time, and then move the other people here and then build another.
I looked at the sites. I think that there's 2 adjacent sites to each other.
Yep.
I think there could be the possibility to build a new building, which leaves the existing 70 units intact, add a new building, and then the other units could be removed to create the opportunity for a future building,
Right.
because this needs to be a phased approach. But
Yeah.
right now, I think they're treading water in place, doing the best they can with the funding that's available. Without the small cities grants, I don't know where they would be, honestly. So that's a tremendous benefit that the town has been able to help them with. But it's probably time to think bigger and bolder, because our age composition is changing. There are more elderly people. People didn't always get retirement plans. They're going to outlive their savings. So there's going to be a growing demand. Right now, I think the wait list is it up to 7 years?
Wow.
Really? Wow.
So if you look at the normal turnover of units and the number of people on the wait list, you might think, well, my mom needs a place to go now. I'm sorry, we'll take your name and we'll get back to you when we have an opening. I'm not saying that we're not running a hotel, but I think the issue ends up being there's a huge demand, and we might be a little bit behind the eight ball on this. So whatever support I think we can give to the Housing Authority could help advance this significantly.
And somewhere, and I'm just thinking out loud, like, when hotel projects or motel projects that are here comes up for sale, that might be one of the opportunity, right? Because they are one bedroom and all that, and, conversion into for one person or two people.
I think there's a couple of issues with the Housing Authority. They are not all full-time people. I think some people are working full-time but aren't in full-time positions, if you understand what I'm trying to tell you. The units that they have are all in one geographic location, so the administrative. But if we were going to go to more sites off-site in different locations, the administrative capacity of the organization is going to have to grow and change with it. And that's, again, a big change. We have run it this way for probably 30 or 40 years. And maybe, I don't know, it's time to revisit that. And I think certainly if there were buildings that would help us address this in a meaningful way, that would be huge.
Can I ask a question? Just to clarify.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I was just wondering, how many people do we have now? Rocky Hill has a housing authority.
Correct?
Correct. How many people do we have now that work in it?
Work in it, you mean as in staff for the Housing Authority? I think you have a part-time,
You have, I think she's the full-time administrator, Susan Moores, and then I know you have a full-time maintenance person. And that's,
yeah, but I didn't even think that they were full-time. I mean, I think
That's-
they were working full-time, but I wasn't sure that their positions were funded as full-time, so.
I think that's it. And they're on call 24/7.
Yes, they are.
Oh, yeah.
On page 24 is the concept of increasing deed-restricted housing. This starts to now tie into what we were talking about earlier about inclusionary zoning. So if there is going to be a zone change or text change along the Silas Dean, then we could have an inclusionary zoning requirement. Inclusionary means was originally devised as the opposite of exclusionary zoning.
It's allowed.
Yep, and so, but it's a very large envelope of what things could be included in that. But the basic idea is to take affirmative steps to provide for, require, encourage housing as part of regulation changes in the future. Many of these fall to the Planning and Zoning Commission in terms of the reg changes, and some of these fall to the Affordable Housing Committee to investigate some ideas. I think number 4 on page 24 falls to the council, because this is, again, the concept of tax credits, tax abatements, tax increment financing, all things that could be used to encourage this type of scenario. And because they're tax related, we can't do that. That would have to fall to the council. And then on page 5, just investigate whether there are ways to increase other state recognized units. So if we can get more people here with rental certificates, boom, that counts to our list. Or encourage people with CHFA mortgages to come to Rocky Hill. Some communities are talking about the idea of down payment assistance that paid when you move. Boom, we get our money back, but you were encouraged to locate here and bring your CHFA mortgage. And also in terms of rental assistance, security deposits. As you perhaps may recall from days of being a tenant, you don't always get your security deposit back from the place you're living in when you have to put a security deposit down on the new place. So you got a cash flow crunch. And the issue is the town says, look, we can assist in this effort. You might bring people again to Rocky Hill. So just, can we be creative here and think about ways to do that?
Yeah, years ago, we did have a down payment assistance program for first-time home buyers. So we did do that. We partnered with Weathersfield and Newington, so it was their Tri-Town program, and then it was Newington, I think, got most of the pie. So, because it was a first come, first served basis, but there were some people that did partake in that program, and then that kind of fell off, because we also had that with the housing rehab program as well, so.
Page 26 is about, as opportunities arise, undertake a review of the regulations to see if there's impediments that could be removed to housing. Sometimes there's limitations on building height or setbacks or other things like that that actually make housing more challenging. And if the result could be either deed-restricted housing or naturally occurring affordable housing, those might be opportunities to consider. And then also the concept, which is illustrated on page 27 of this phrase, missing middle housing. So the concept of middle housing is meant to describe housing that falls between single family at one end of the spectrum and then large multifamily developments at the other end of the spectrum. And there's a whole bunch of housing in the middle, as illustrated here on page 27, that could fit into Rocky Hill, but our regulations don't really permit it that way. So could we adopt regulations to allow other flavors of housing? And the answer is perhaps yes. And so to investigate these, and again, the concept, and you may read about it more in the future, is the concept of middle housing. And the reason they call it missing middle is because development ended up going to the two ends, either large multifamily or single family, and forgetting about all the stuff in the middle. And there could be ways to do that.
Plus, we did have, once again, a preliminary discussion with a property owner on Solstein Highway, looking to redevelop a property on Solstein Highway with just what we're talking about right now, taking down a structure and possibly putting up 4 units, looking like a large home combination, mixed use, but it wouldn't be mixed use, but looking like a mixed use commercial building, but would be 4 units of residential housing. So.
And so some of the pictures here, for example, on page 27, bottom right, is a mixed-use building in Connecticut, which has housing above and has provided space for businesses below. And so that might be something that, people might prefer not to have to do the business if the market's not there today. On the other hand, the commission might actually want to consider having some business as part of that. So there's different choices and options here. On the bottom of page 26, I identify some sections of the zoning regulations that might be fertile areas for commission review. It's not a mandate. It's just, again, areas to investigate. And then on page 28 are other strategies, and this are ways or things for the community to consider in the future. They're not as high importance, intensity, or impact as some of the strategies on the preceding pages, but the Fair Rent Commission, the Commission on Inclusion and Innovation, the concept of elderly tax relief, continue to provide social services in the senior center, all these things actually have housing implications to them. And so the plan advocates for continuing those and just recognizing and supporting those. And then the appendix has got the glossary of key housing terms overall. And then also at the end, on page 34, are some examples of some design guidelines which might provide the basis in the future for different types of regulations or approaches. And again, you may want to wait to see what the state comes up with here.
So we're calling this a plan, but it's actually more like a guidance document. And to have value, it needs to be actionable. And we're missing an action plan. And an action plan to start with, and right now we don't know what the details would be, but an action plan would be some prescribed next steps. What are we going to do next to make it real? I just thinking that to have the word plan in here, there's got to be some plan of action.
One of the things we were talking about, Glenn and I were talking about on the phone before tonight's meeting, was the choice of verbs. And I think a lot of what you see in here is encourage, investigate, whatever. modify regulations. That's a plan. Create an affordable housing committee. That's a plan. I don't know.
And I think this is a statutory affordable housing plan, right? I mean, I think that's
I don't
how
know if
they're
that's what
defining
you're-
it.
I mean, does this
Yeah.
meet the criteria of, of what the state would consider an affordable housing plan? It meets the criteria?
Yes, but we want to make it happen.
Yeah, we want to make it real, yeah.
So the challenge, I mean, I think as part of my work, as you know, with the Rocky Hill on the POCD and with other municipalities as well, there's often a plan contains sort of two key parts, what I call policies, which is we should eat better in our lives, right? And action steps. Action step is I'm going to have a healthy, tonight for dinner, I'm going to have this, right? That's an actionable thing. And the challenge in a municipal setting, if we were a military organization or a corporation, and I can pretty much, as if I was your superior, tell you what you're going to be doing today, or next week, or next year, next quarter. I can do that. A municipality gets a lot different because the council has independent authority. The Affordable Housing Committee is going to have their own charge. Planning and zoning, you have statutory constraints, due process,
Yeah,
equal
yeah.
protection, all the other stuff. So the verbs are one of the biggest challenges I think I sort of deal with. I'm trying to capture things that we have talked about before, so I might have tended to use the word investigate, hoping that the commission and others would take the initiative and do this. Particularly if the leader is a different group. If it's the town council, most times I've found over the years that if you tell the council what to do, they're not enamored with that concept. But if you encourage them and tell them how this is a better scenario for the town, then they will try to work with you and assist. So the verb choices are delicate. And while I share your desire for an actionable plan, in a municipal setting, often that happens through consensus rather than you, as the Planning and Zoning Commission, would say, hey, we're listed in the following. We're going to change all these verbs from investigate to adopt. I'm good, because you've told me that.
Yeah, I know. It's just, and I'm just thinking in terms of strategic planning, which is going to include tasks and target dates. It's not saying that exactly what you're going to do, but it's putting a direction to what you're going to do next. And even if it's as simple as there's just 3 tactical actions that we're going to take as a result of this, which is, set up a committee, investigate it, and do something by a certain date. I think back to the plan of conservation and development, which for a long time just sat there until folks started meeting again and then putting out a spreadsheet and saying, okay, we're going to do this.
So I think-
mean, there's still stuff to be done, but.
I think you guys are the umbrella for this plan, right? This plan is happening underneath your authority and your guidance. My thought process or my suggestion for your consideration would be to move ahead with this plan as a framework, and then if in the month or two following adoption, get into that and say, how are we going to monitor or manage this until the Affordable Housing Committee is set up? And the issue is, hey, as planning and zoning, we can do these things and we will. And then encourage the Affordable Housing Committee in their efforts. They're going to be, in a sense, your baby. You have recommended them and move in that direction. So I think I'm all about action. I think to have created plans over the years and they don't get implemented, it's very frustrating. But on the other hand, I can't tell you that you have to do it either. I have to try to convince you why it's best for Rocky Hill that we do this. So,
And I think what happens is, once you start putting deadlines and things like that,
Target dates.
targets.
no,
there you go.
target dates, right? So what will happen is, this plan is prepared under a state statute, right? So when you go for anything and say, oh, according to our affordable plan, we are seeking this funding, they'll say, oh, let me look at it. Oh, your target date was 2023. What have you done? then we'll say, well, we were just talking.
We had a lack of funding, which is why we're here.
So I think it gets tricky once you start putting those things. I think here and I liked about when you know, the word like investigate, right? And what I was talking about before, when a development comes in, we can look at our zoning regulation and maybe relax some of those. And that's what investigate is. When application comes in, and we can look at what can be accommodated, you know, give and take and whatever, right? I think. All right, any other questions? If not, do we have to take a motion now? Right, is that a?
Well, if
Or-
the commission is comfortable with what we have, I would certainly suggest we set a public hearing. I mean, as Glenn pointed out prior to the meeting, there's no requirement that we set a public hearing. I'm all for having a public hearing, having the input, maybe having some press on the document to get,
Yep.
you know,
No, public input is always good.
it's, you know, want to have that as part of the
So
process.
I can make a
so.
motion.
So can we make motion here, because we don't have.
I can make a motion to set a date.
says-
Do we want to state
It
the
says
date?
review draft and set a public hearing. I did that on purpose.
Sneaky.
Kim,
Can we set the public hearing to align with a regular meeting?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can do either, yeah.
You could certainly do that.
Oh, okay.
What is your regular meeting in December?
So,
set date?
so I
believe
think the
it's-
next is November 16th.
No, it can't, no, it won't be, that's too soon.
Yep. Because we need 30, 35, so I think it has to,
December.
it will go in.
I think it's December. I think we have the 21st, believe it or not, but we could also do the 28th as a special meeting.
So I'm actually holding right now the 14th, the 21st, and I'm pretty sure the 28th is open, so.
But isn't the 15th of December the regular meeting?
Don't you normally meet on Wednesdays?
The 14th is our,
14th.
is the wetlands meeting. So I think
Oh,
think,
of
believe it or
December.
not, it was set up for the 21st, believe it or not. And then we have
Oh, I'm
the
on the wrong
28th
day.
as a
The
special
14th.
meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
So we could move our regular meeting to, move our regular meeting to the 28th, and that would be a special meeting. Instead of it being a regular meeting on the 21st, we could just have our regular meeting agenda on the 28th and have this as part of that. If that's what you would
No.
prefer to do.
The regular meeting you're saying is scheduled in December for the 21st?
Yes, we could change that. That
Oh,
was.
no, but what, could we just have the public hearing before the regular meeting on the 21st?
We could either do the 21st, or if you'd like, we can just cancel that meeting and create a special meeting on the 20th.
Nobody's going to be around.
I don't know.
I mean,
I'm-
it's the
I'm always
holiday
around,
week.
so,
It's holiday week, so it's,
21st is getting tight, so.
I know, that's why I'm saying.
I think the 21st should be fine.
That's okay.
You think, I
Whatever you wanna
agree,
do.
the 28th might be too.
It's going to be hard to get a quorum on the 28th.
Yeah.
right, I mean, 20,
And, but as long as it's along with a regular meeting, it shouldn't be too complicated.
Okay.
So I'll set a motion to accept a date for a public hearing for the December 21st.
What time would you like that meeting? Would you like it at 6? Would you like it
I
at
can do 6,
6?
I'm fine with 6.
yeah, can do,
You want me to rephrase the motion?
That's fine.
Okay.
so it's December 21st.
December 21st at 6 PM. Do we have a second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
I have a quick discussion.
Item
we have-
2C, review and adopt, so maybe we table this.
Well, this is, the only thing that's different on this agenda, this is the same meeting schedule you've seen for years.
Okay.
Third Wednesday of the month. The only thing that is different is in July, instead of having the third Wednesday of the month, we're going to the fourth Wednesday of the month. There is a, we're looking at religious holidays and other holidays from various cultures prominent in our community. And there is one coming up on the third Wednesday of July of next year. So we moved our regular meeting date in July to the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Okay.
Is it Diwali?
And there's only one.
No,
No,
Diwali would be in October.
October.
so, and that's the only thing.
Okay.
That's the only thing that's different. So you can certainly act on it. I do need to get this to the town clerk, before the end of the year. So that's why I have it on this agenda. If you'd like, I can carry it over
Yeah, I think
to,
I would like to just carry it over. so
to
at least
November
everybody has-
16th.
Yeah.
okay? So we'll table action on this until November 16th. Okay.
All right, motion to, all set before we,
I just had a quick question
Okay.
for Kim. Kim, I was reviewing the map for the MDC, and I know we already voted on it. My question or concern is, they're showing the easement on the adjacent property of, it says Town of Rocky Hill property, and then it shows it encroaches on the adjacent property, but it doesn't state if that's town property.
Okay, that's correct. That the driveway would be on the town property. The easement, they have to work that out with the adjacent property owner.
Oh, so it is encroaching on the adjacent property owner. So the easement that we approved is just for the town property?
Correct.
Which won't work unless they get the adjacent property to agree. Okay. I just want to make sure I was seeing that correctly.
all right.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very